stop scrolling. Right now. What I'm about to tell you will shatter everything you thought you knew about Hollywood's golden age. Those glamorous smiles you've seen in black and white photographs, they were hiding something far darker than you could ever imagine. The stars who danced across silver screens, who made America laugh and cry, who became household names and national treasures, they were monsters. Some of them were predators, others were accomplices to murder. And the most disturbing part, the entire system was designed to protect them. You believed those smiles, didn't you? You thought Hollywood's golden age was all champagne toasts and red carpet premieres. Forget it all. Burn those nostalgic illusions to ash. Because what happened behind the closed doors of Beverly Hills mansions, what transpired in the executive suites of studio lots, what was buried beneath the California soil, it wasn't entertainment. It was evil. Calculated, systematic, protected evil. I'm going to take you down into the basement of the Dream Factory. We're going to walk through 10 cases that Hollywood desperately tried to erase from history. From a beloved comedian whose parties ended in death, to swashbuckling heroes who preyed on teenage girls, to a studio system that fed its stars morphine and called it medicine. Each story is more horrifying than the last, each name more shocking. And by the end, you'll understand something crucial. This wasn't about individual moral failings. This was institutional corruption on a scale that would make modern Hollywood blush. The final story will send shivers down your spine. It involves a knife, a mobster, and a 14-year-old girl forced to become her mother's protector. It's a tale that asks a question we still can't answer. Who really wielded that blade on that rainy April night? But before we descend into this darkness, I need you to do something. Subscribe to this channel. Hit that like button. Because what you're about to hear needs to be remembered. The dead deserve to be remembered. And the system that created this nightmare? It needs to be exposed. Let's begin with the man who started it all. America loved Roscoe Arbuckle. They called him Fatty, though he hated the name. They packed theaters to watch his rotund figure tumble across screens in perfectly timed pratfalls. By 1921, he was earning $1 million a year from Paramount Pictures, roughly $16 million in today's money. He mentored Charlie Chaplin. He discovered Buster Keaton. He was, by every measure, one of the most powerful men in Hollywood. He had the world in the palm of his hand, and he was only 34 years old. But Labor Day weekend 1921 would change everything, would destroy everything, would expose the rot festering beneath Hollywood's glittering surface. Arbuckle drove up to San Francisco with 2 friends, checking into 3 connecting rooms at the luxurious St. Francis Hotel. Room 1219 for Arbuckle, room 1221 for his friend Lowell Sherman, and room 1220 designated as a party room. Despite prohibition being the law of the land, bootleg gin flowed freely. Music played, women arrived. Among them was a 30-year-old aspiring actress named Virginia Rapp, a woman with dreams of stardom and a body already ravaged by chronic bladder inflammation. What happened next depends on who you believe. What we know for certain is that Virginia Rapp became violently ill during that party. She was found in room 1219, screaming and tearing at her clothes. A hotel doctor administered morphine. She died 4 days later on September 9th from a ruptured bladder and peritonitis. Maud Delmont, another party guest with a criminal record as long as her arm, told police that Arbuckle had dragged Rapp into that bedroom. She claimed Rapp had gasped her final words, "He hurt me." The press didn't wait for facts. William Randolph Hearst's newspaper empire exploded with headlines painting Arbuckle as a grotesque predator who had used his weight to crush an innocent girl. The story sold more papers than the sinking of the Lusitania. Morality groups demanded the death penalty. Women's clubs called for his head. America's beloved funny man was transformed overnight into a symbol of Hollywood's depravity. 3 trials followed. 3 separate juries examined the evidence, heard testimony that changed with each telling, watched witnesses recant and disappear. The first trial in November 1921 ended in a hung jury, 10 votes for acquittal. The second trial in January 1922 also ended deadlocked, but this time 9 votes for guilty. The third trial in April 1922 lasted only 5 minutes of deliberation. The jury didn't just acquit Arbuckle. They issued an unprecedented written apology stating there wasn't the slightest proof connecting him to any crime and that a great injustice had been done to him. But the apology changed nothing. The damage was permanent. Arbuckle had spent nearly $700,000 on legal defense. His films were pulled from circulation. His contracts were quietly terminated. The man who once made America laugh was no longer welcome on screen. He continued working behind the camera, directing a few projects under the name William B. Goodrich, a bitter pseudonym meaning will be good. The work was inconsistent, the income unstable. He withdrew from public life, struggling with alcohol, and according to those close to him, found peace only briefly and rarely. On June 29, 1933, Roscoe Arbuckle died of a heart attack at the age of 46, a man ruined not by proven wrongdoing, but by public perception. What happened next revealed how the system truly worked. The investigation showed no clear evidence of violence. Medical findings pointed to long-standing health issues that could explain the tragedy. But facts stood no chance against sensational headlines. The studios distanced themselves, presenting Arbuckle as proof of reform, while quietly continuing the same practices that had caused problems in the first place. If Arbuckle was destroyed despite uncertainty, the next star was protected, despite serious allegations. Errol Flynn was Hollywood's ideal leading man. Handsome, athletic, and charismatic, he became a symbol of on-screen heroism through films like Captain Blood, The Adventures of Robin Hood, and The Seahawk. Audiences adored him. Studios profited immensely. He was marketed as the very image of charm and confidence. Behind the scenes, however, his reputation was far more troubling. In the early 1940s, Flynn faced criminal charges involving inappropriate relationships with underage girls. The case quickly became a national spectacle. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse, many of them supporters eager to defend their idol. What followed exposed how celebrity power could shape justice. One of the girls was 17 when she encountered Flynn at a private gathering. She had recently arrived in Los Angeles, hoping to break into the film industry. According to testimony, she was encouraged to attend with the suggestion that it could help her career. Alcohol was involved, and she later described an encounter that left her distressed and frightened. Another girl was even younger at the time of her experience. She described separate incidents that allegedly occurred during a professional outing connected to a photo shoot. Her account stated that she was placed in a vulnerable situation by someone far older and more powerful than she was. Flynn hired one of Hollywood's most influential defense attorneys. The strategy was aggressive and relentless. Rather than focusing on the events themselves, the defense attacked the girl's character, personal history, and credibility. Their lives were examined in detail, their choices questioned, their integrity challenged in front of the nation. Meanwhile, Flynn appeared calm and composed in court. The media portrayed him sympathetically. Entertainment magazines suggested he was the victim of a misunderstanding or an attempt to damage his reputation. Studio publicity ensured his image remained largely intact. The jury reached a verdict quickly. Flynn was cleared of all charges. A juror later explained that doubts about the girls' personal lives influenced the decision, implying that their past experiences made their accounts less believable. Flynn's career continued without interruption. He went on to appear in dozens of films and remained a celebrated figure until his death years later. His name even became slang for effortless success. The girls, however, carried the consequences. They were dismissed, disbelieved, and publicly scrutinized, while the system closed ranks around one of its most valuable stars. Here's what the trial exposed. The statutory rape laws were only enforced selectively. Both girls were white, which is the only reason prosecutors proceeded at all. Had they been black or Latina, their accusations would never have seen a courtroom. And even with the law on their side, the victims faced a defense strategy specifically designed to make reporting assault so traumatic that most would choose silence instead. The system didn't fail these girls. The system was designed to protect Flynn. But what happens when the predator isn't the star himself, but the studio that employs him? When the crime isn't a single act of violence, but systematic poisoning disguised as medical care? They called him the screen's most perfect lover. Wallace Reed was the all-American ideal, made flesh. Princeton-educated, athletically gifted, handsome beyond measure. He could play action heroes and romantic leads with equal skill. Women adored him. Men wanted to be him. He was Paramount's biggest star, the king of the studio, earning extraordinary sums and appearing in more than 60 films. His marriage to actress Dorothy Davenport was Hollywood's favorite love story. A beautiful couple living a beautiful life. It was all a lie built on morphine and desperation. In 1919, Wallace Reed was filming The Valley of the Giants in Oregon when the cast and crew's train derailed while crossing a bridge. Reed suffered a severe head injury, a 3-inch gash on his scalp and a piece of broken glass that cut his arm to the bone. Several others were injured. They were in a remote location. Help wouldn't arrive for 12 hours. The studio couldn't afford delays, couldn't afford to lose shooting days, couldn't afford to let their most valuable asset rest and heal like a human being instead of a piece of machinery. So they summoned a doctor to pump Reed full of morphine so he could work through the pain. Day after day, dose after dose, the studio fed him opioids to keep him functional. And when filming wrapped, when Reed returned to Hollywood still in agony from injuries that had never properly healed, the studio kept supplying the morphine. Their valuable film property couldn't be allowed to be in pain, couldn't be allowed to stop working. Reed became addicted. Inevitably, horrifyingly, predictably addicted. By 1921, his wife Dorothy discovered his secret. She watched helplessly as the drugs ravaged him. He lost weight, his health deteriorated, his beautiful features became gaunt. He began drinking heavily, hosting wild all-night parties at their home in an attempt to numb what the morphine couldn't. The studio knew. Of course they knew. They were the ones supplying him. In December 1922, Dorothy took her husband to a sanitarium for treatment. She went public with his addiction on December 16th, telling the Los Angeles Times that Wallace was fighting the most heroic role of his life. The press coverage was sympathetic at first, framing Reed as a victim of circumstance rather than a moral failure. But behind the scenes, the studio machinery worked to shift the narrative. They couldn't let the public know they had created this addiction. Couldn't admit to the systematic drugging of their stars to maintain production schedules. Wallace Reed died on January 18, 1923, at age 31. The official cause was influenza, but his immune system had been destroyed by years of intravenous drug abuse. His body simply couldn't fight the infection. Dorothy was holding him in her arms when he took his final breath. Then she walked outside to waiting microphones from nationwide radio networks and introduced herself in a firm, unflinching tone. "This is Mrs. Wallace Reed." For the rest of her life, Dorothy campaigned against drug addiction, always introducing herself by her late husband's name. She produced the anti-drug film Human Wreckage and toured the country giving lectures. She transformed her husband's death into a crusade, but she couldn't admit the full truth, that Hollywood hadn't just enabled Wallace's addiction, they had created it. They had turned pain management into pharmaceutical dependency because production schedules mattered more than human lives. Here's what Wallace Reed's death revealed. The studio system functioned as a drug cartel. Studio doctors prescribed uppers to keep stars working 18-hour days, downers to help them sleep, and opioids to manage injuries without losing shooting time. When stars became addicted, the studios either supplied them or looked the other way while they found black market sources. And when they died, the studios rewrote the narrative to protect themselves. Reed was the third major Paramount scandal in 1922. The system had produced a crisis, and their solution wasn't to change their practices. Their solution was better public relations. But some stars weren't passive victims of the studio machine. Some actively participated in creating the nightmare. Some became subjects of federal investigations that spanned decades. Charlie Chaplin was a genius. His films revolutionized cinema. His Little Tramp character became one of the most recognizable figures in human history. He was also under FBI surveillance for decades because of his disturbing pattern of relationships with underage girls and his alleged communist sympathies. J. Edgar Hoover maintained a file on Chaplin that would eventually exceed 1,900 pages. The FBI first took interest in Chaplin in 1922, investigating alleged connections to the American Communist Party. But it was his personal life that provided the ammunition Hoover needed. Chaplin had a pattern, a preference, a pathology that couldn't be ignored. He pursued very young women, sometimes girls who were legally children. When he was 29, he married 16-year-old Mildred Harris, who was pregnant with his child. When he was 35, he married 16-year-old Lita Gray. His third wife, Paulette Goddard, was 26 when they married, an anomaly in his romantic history. His fourth wife, Una O'Neill, was 18 when she married the 54-year-old Chaplin. But it was the Joan Barry case that brought federal charges. In 1941, 41-year-old Chaplin met 24-year-old aspiring actress Joan Barry. He signed her to a $75 a week contract and began an affair. By mid-1942, he let her contract expire and ended the relationship. To send her back to New York, he paid for her train ticket, an act of seeming kindness that would become his legal nightmare. The FBI charged Chaplin with violating the Mann Act, also known as the White Slave Traffic Act. The law criminalized transporting women across state lines for immoral purposes. By paying for Barry's interstate travel, Chaplin had technically violated federal law. In February 1944, a federal grand jury in Los Angeles indicted him. The trial was a prosecution Hoover hoped would destroy Chaplin. Barry also filed a paternity suit claiming Chaplin had fathered her child. The media coverage was savage. Chaplin's left-leaning political views, his criticism of American capitalism in films like Modern Times, his outspoken anti-fascism in The Great Dictator, all of it made him a target. The government wanted him gone. After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury acquitted Chaplin of the Mann Act charges. But the paternity suit proceeded, and despite blood tests proving he wasn't the father, California law at the time didn't allow blood evidence. The court ordered him to pay child support for a child that wasn't biologically his. The damage was catastrophic. In 1952, while Chaplin was attending the London premiere of his film Limelight, the U.S. Attorney General revoked his re-entry permit. They demanded an interview about his political views and moral behavior before allowing him back. Chaplin chose exile instead. He severed ties with America, settling in Switzerland with his family. He wouldn't return to the United States until 1972, when he was 83 years old, to accept an honorary Academy Award. Here's what the Chaplin case demonstrated. The FBI weaponized morality laws to target political dissidents. They used the Mann Act, originally intended to combat sex trafficking, to prosecute consensual relationships and punish left-wing celebrities. Chaplin's actual pattern of pursuing very young women was troubling, but the government's interest wasn't in protecting those women. It was in silencing a vocal critic of American capitalism. The system protected predators when they were useful and destroyed them when they became inconvenient. Morality was a tool, not a principle. But what happens when the scandal involves not just one star, but an entire criminal underworld? When organized crime collides with Hollywood glamour and the result is a knife in the stomach. Lana Turner was Hollywood royalty. Discovered at 16 in a drugstore, she became the epitome of the studio system success story. Beautiful, photogenic, and endlessly marketable as the Sweater Girl, she starred in classic films and married repeatedly, each romance dissected by fan magazines. By 1957, she'd been married 4 times and had a daughter, Cheryl Crane, from her second marriage. She was also about to enter a relationship that would end in blood. Johnny Stompanato was a third-rate hoodlum and professional gigolo. A former Marine with powerful build and hooded eyes, he worked as a bodyguard for Mickey Cohen, one of Los Angeles' most notorious crime bosses. He wore expensive clothes, drove nice cars, and had a reputation for violence against women. He also lied about his age, telling Turner he was 43 when he was actually 32, 4 years younger than the actress. Their relationship was toxic from the beginning. Stompanato was insanely jealous, temperamental, and physically abusive. He beat Turner repeatedly, sometimes viciously. When she traveled to England in early 1958 to film Another Time, Another Place opposite Sean Connery, Stompanato followed her and brandished a gun in Connery's face, leading to a physical fight. Turner tried to end the relationship multiple times, but Stompanato wouldn't let her go. He was extorting her, bleeding her finances, threatening to destroy her career and harm her family. On April 4th, 1958, Good Friday, Stompanato arrived at Turner's new rental home at 730 North Bedford Drive in Beverly Hills. Turner had decided this would be the night she ended things permanently. When she told him about his lie regarding his age and demanded he leave, Stompanato erupted. He threatened to kill Turner, her teenage daughter, and her mother. He threatened to slash Turner's face with a straight razor, to break her bones, to make gangster threats that left no doubt about his capacity for violence. 14-year-old Cheryl Crane heard the screaming from her bedroom. She ran downstairs and grabbed an 8-inch carving knife from the kitchen. She went to her mother's bedroom door and knocked. When it opened, Stompanato loomed behind Turner. What happened next has been debated for more than 60 years, but the official version is this. Cheryl entered the room, and Stompanato walked toward her. The knife entered his abdomen, penetrating vital organs. He collapsed, making terrible, gasping sounds. Turner initially thought her daughter had punched Stompanato. Only when she saw the blood did she realize a knife was involved. She held towels to the wound, while Stompanato choked and died on her pink bedroom carpet. The inquest on April 11th became a televised spectacle. Turner testified with cameras rolling, describing the horror of that night. The coroner's jury deliberated less than 30 minutes before ruling the death-justifiable homicide. Cheryl had acted in defense of her mother, but Stompanato's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit seeking $750,000. They claimed Turner had wielded the knife and Cheryl had taken the blame to protect her mother. The lawsuit cited expert testimony that the angle of the stab wound suggested Stompanato was lying down when he was stabbed, contradicting the accepted version of events. The suit was eventually settled out of court in 1962 for $20,000. Oddly, the scandal revived Turner's career. Her next film, Imitation of Life, was a box office smash. The public's fascination with the case translated into ticket sales. Hollywood had learned a valuable lesson: scandal sells, as long as the victim isn't one of your own. Cheryl Crane's life was less fortunate. She was made a ward of the state and placed in reform schools. She fled twice, climbing walls and walking miles before being returned. She later revealed that she'd been sexually abused by Turner's fourth husband, actor Lex Barker, starting before age 10. She was also allegedly abused by Stompanato himself. Years later, in her 1988 memoir, Detour, A Hollywood Story, Crane wrote that she doesn't remember grabbing the knife. Some theorists still believe Turner killed Stompanato and her daughter took the fall. Here's what the case exposed: Hollywood's intersection with organized crime was deeper than anyone wanted to admit. Mickey Cohen, Stompanato's boss, held court at the inquest like a mobster from Central Casting, refusing to answer questions on grounds he might be accused of murder himself, a bizarre statement nobody questioned. The studios, the police, the courts, all navigated around this criminal infrastructure because to expose it fully would reveal how dependent Hollywood was on mob money, mob muscle, and mob silence. But if the Stompanato killing raised questions that remain unanswered, our next case is a murder that has never been solved at all. A director shot in his own home, evidence mishandled, suspects protected, and a cover-up that may have involved the highest levels of Hollywood power. February 1st, 1922, was an unusually cold night in Los Angeles. Director William Desmond Taylor spent the evening with actress and comedian Mabel Normand at his bungalow in the Alvarado Court Apartments. They drank gin despite prohibition, discussed philosophy and film, and enjoyed each other's company. At 7:45 p.m., Taylor walked Normand to her car. They blew kisses as her chauffeur drove away. Taylor returned to his bungalow. Around 8 p.m., neighbors heard what sounded like a car backfiring. One neighbor, Faith McLean, looked out her window and saw a figure in a long coat emerge from Taylor's bungalow. The person walked calmly down the steps and disappeared into an alleyway. The next morning, Taylor's butler, Henry Peavy, arrived for work. His screams shattered the morning quiet. William Desmond Taylor, 49 years old, one of Hollywood's most respected directors and president of the Motion Picture Directors Association, was lying on his living room floor, dead. When police arrived, the scene was chaos. Studio executives and actors were already inside the home, rummaging through Taylor's belongings. Someone identifying himself as a doctor had examined the body and declared Taylor had died of a stomach hemorrhage. Then, this mysterious doctor vanished, never to be seen again. When investigators actually examined the body, they found Taylor had been shot in the back with a small caliber pistol. Robbery wasn't the motive. His wallet contained $78, and he wore a 2-carat diamond ring, but a large sum of cash he'd shown his accountant the day before was missing. The investigation immediately became a circus. Suspects multiplied. Mabel Normand, the last person to see Taylor alive besides the killer, faced intense scrutiny despite clearly not being the murderer. Her cocaine addiction became public knowledge. Her career was destroyed by association with the scandal. Mary Miles Minter, a 19-year-old actress who had starred in several of Taylor's films, became another prime suspect when investigators found love letters from her in Taylor's home. They also found her nightgown in his bedroom. Minter had once attempted suicide with the same type of gun used to kill Taylor. Her mother, Charlotte Shelby, was a controlling stage mother who had threatened other directors who showed interest in her daughter. Shelby's alibi witness received suspiciously large sums of money after the murder. Then there was Edward Sands, Taylor's former butler, who had disappeared after embezzling from the director. Sands had access to Taylor's home, knowledge of his habits, and motive for revenge. There was also the drug angle. Taylor had been actively fighting drug trafficking in Hollywood, trying to help Mabel Normand overcome her cocaine addiction and threatening the dealers who supplied the industry. Some theorized his murder was a hit ordered by drug traffickers. Multiple confessions emerged over the years, all deemed unreliable. One man claimed he drove the assassins to Taylor's home. Another said he'd acted on behalf of someone else. None of the confessions led anywhere. Years later, director King Vidor became obsessed with the case and conducted his own investigation. In interviews before his death, he suggested that Mary Miles Minter had told him, in an ambiguous way, that her mother, Charlotte Shelby, had killed Taylor after finding Minter at his home. Shelby's mother allegedly threw the murder weapon, a .38 Smith & Wesson revolver, into a Louisiana bayou in August 1922. The case was never solved. To this day, we don't know who killed William Desmond Taylor. But here's what we do know. The crime scene was deliberately compromised. Studio executives contaminated evidence, removed items from Taylor's home, and interfered with the investigation from the first moment. They weren't trying to solve the murder. They were trying to manage it, to control the narrative, to protect secrets that were more valuable than justice. Taylor's funeral was attended by Hollywood's elite. He was interred at Hollywood Forever Cemetery under his birth name, William C. Dean Tanner, with a simple inscription, "Beloved father of Ethel Dean Tanner." The daughter he had abandoned decades earlier when he walked out on his first family and reinvented himself in California. The system didn't just fail to solve this murder. The system actively prevented it from being solved. Because the truth, whatever it was, threatened too many powerful people. But not every scandal could be buried. Sometimes the evidence was too public, too documented, too impossible to spin. Sometimes a star's private diary became courtroom evidence, exposing the machinery of exploitation for all to see. Mary Astor was one of Hollywood's most accomplished actresses, with a career spanning decades and an eventual Academy Award for The Great Lie. She seemed to have it all: beauty, talent, acclaim. What the public didn't know was that she also kept an extraordinarily detailed diary documenting her extramarital affairs, including explicit descriptions of encounters with numerous men. In 1936, Astor was locked in a bitter custody battle with her second husband, Dr. Franklin Thorpe, over their 4-year-old daughter, Marilyn. Thorpe's attorneys obtained portions of Astor's diary and threatened to enter them as evidence, arguing they proved she was an unfit mother. The diary contained passages describing affairs with multiple men, including detailed accounts of sexual encounters. The scandal exploded across headlines. The trial became a media sensation. Reporters packed the courtroom. The public was fascinated by the spectacle of a glamorous movie star's private life being dissected in legal proceedings. The diary entries, or at least summaries of them, were read in court, exposing Astor to public humiliation. What made the case particularly disturbing was how it weaponized a woman's sexuality against her in a custody dispute. The diary proved she'd had affairs, but it didn't prove she was a bad mother. Yet the legal system and public opinion treated her sexual history as disqualifying evidence of her fitness to parent. The trial raised profound questions about privacy, morality, and gender double standards. Ultimately, Astor was granted custody, but the damage to her reputation was severe. The system had used her own words to shame her, to punish her for behaving in ways that male stars engaged in, routinely without consequence. Where were the public readings of male actors' diaries detailing their conquests? Where were the custody challenges based on their infidelities? The Astor case revealed how the legal system could be weaponized to control and punish women who violated social norms. It also exposed how little privacy protection existed for anyone, star or otherwise, once they became embroiled in legal proceedings. Tallulah Bankhead was a force of nature, witty, irreverent, openly bisexual at a time when such things weren't discussed. She lived her life with complete disregard for convention. She was also spiraling into addiction and self-destruction, repeatedly involved in police incidents that were widely reported but never resulted in serious consequences. Bankhead's substance abuse was well documented. She drank heavily and used cocaine regularly. Her behavior became increasingly erratic. Police were called to disturbances involving her multiple times. She was known for disorderly conduct that would have landed anyone without fame in jail. But Bankhead was protected by her celebrity. The police interventions were handled discreetly. The incidents were reported in gossip columns, but never resulted in arrests or prosecutions. The system that mercilessly destroyed less famous addicts showed infinite patience with a Broadway and Hollywood star. This reflected a broader pattern. Accountability for major stars was optional. The same behaviors that would ruin ordinary people were treated as colorful eccentricity when performed by the famous. Bankhead could be publicly intoxicated, publicly difficult, publicly unwell, and face no real consequences, because her value to the entertainment industry outweighed any social harm. But some crimes were too clear, too violent, too undeniable to be swept under the rug. Some Hollywood figures did face justice, though even then the system tried to soften the blow. Spade Cooley was known as the King of Western Swing, a band leader and television personality who had his own show in Los Angeles. He seemed wholesome, family-friendly entertainment. On April 3, 1961, he brutally murdered his wife Ella May in front of their teenage daughter. The killing was savage. Cooley beat Ella May for hours, stomping on her stomach until her internal organs ruptured. He forced their daughter Melody to watch. The violence was premeditated and sustained, an execution carried out in their own home. Ella May had told friends she wanted a divorce. That was her death sentence. Cooley was arrested, tried, and convicted of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. Unlike so many other Hollywood figures, he actually faced consequences for his crime. The evidence was too clear, the violence too extreme, the witnesses too credible. But even then, the system showed him favor. In 1969, Cooley was granted a 72-hour furlough from prison to perform at a benefit concert. During this furlough, while backstage preparing to perform, he suffered a heart attack and died. He had served less than 9 years of his life sentence. Cooley's case stands out precisely because it's so unusual. He was held criminally responsible. He went to prison. But even a convicted murderer with Hollywood connections received privileges, a furlough to perform, time outside prison walls, that ordinary inmates would never get. The system protected its own even when the crime was undeniable. But all of these individual cases, all of these separate scandals and crimes and cover-ups, they weren't isolated incidents. They were symptoms of a disease that infected the entire industry. The Hollywood studio system itself was a criminal enterprise, a machine designed to extract maximum profit from human beings while minimizing accountability for the damage it caused. The studios controlled every aspect of their stars' lives. They dictated who they could date, who they could marry, what they could say in public. They employed fixers whose entire job was making problems disappear. They had doctors on staff who prescribed whatever drugs were necessary to keep stars working. They had lawyers who specialized in making lawsuits vanish. They had relationships with police departments and district attorneys that ensured certain crimes were never investigated. When Wallace Reed became addicted to morphine, it was studio-supplied. When scandals threatened to damage valuable properties, studios intervened with police and press. When William Desmond Taylor was murdered, studio executives contaminated the crime scene before investigators could properly examine it. When Fatty Arbuckle was accused, the studios used him as a sacrifice to prove they were cleaning house while continuing the same exploitative practices. The system worked through a combination of financial power, institutional relationships, and control of information. Studios advertised heavily in newspapers, giving them leverage over editorial decisions. They employed huge numbers of people in Los Angeles, making local officials dependent on Hollywood's economic health. They created a star system that generated enormous wealth while treating performers as disposable assets. And the public was complicit. We wanted the glamour and the fantasy. We didn't want to know about the morphine addiction or the statutory rape or the mob connections. We preferred the lies to the truth. So the system gave us beautiful lies and buried the ugly truth 6 feet deep. So here we are, at the end of our journey through Hollywood's basement. We've examined 10 stories, 10 glimpses into the machinery of exploitation that powered the Dream Factory. From Fatty Arbuckle's destroyed life to Errol Flynn's protected predation, from Wallace Reed's pharmaceutical murder to Charlie Chaplin's federal persecution, from Lana Turner's violent lover to William Desmond Taylor's unsolved execution, from Mary Astor's weaponized diary to Tallulah Bankhead's protected dissolution, from Spade Cooley's brutal murder to the studio system that enabled it all. Each story reveals the same truth. Hollywood wasn't broken. Hollywood was designed exactly as intended. It was a machine that transformed human beings into commodities, that valued profit over justice, that protected predators and punished victims, that covered up murders and manufactured scandals based on what served the bottom line. The stars we've discussed aren't exceptions. They're examples. These are just the cases that became public, the scandals too big to bury completely. How many other crimes were successfully erased? How many victims were silenced with payoffs and threats? How many powerful men died peacefully in their beds after decades of abuse because no one with authority cared enough to stop them? Think about the 14-year-old girl holding a knife on that rainy April night in 1958. Think about the 17-year-old aspiring actress humiliated in open court because she reported an assault. Think about the 30-year-old woman who died in agony while a comedian's career hung in the balance. Think about the young man who became a morphine addict because production schedules mattered more than his health. These weren't characters in a film. They were real people. They bled real blood. They died real deaths. And the system that destroyed them is still operating today, refined and modernized, but fundamentally unchanged. The machinery has better public relations now, more sophisticated legal strategies, more careful image management. But the core principle remains the same. Protect the asset, minimize the liability, control the narrative. You've looked behind the curtain. You've seen what Hollywood spent a century trying to hide. These stories deserve to be remembered, not as entertainment, not as gossip, but as evidence. Evidence of what happens when profit is the only value and human beings are just another resource to be exploited. The faces in those old black and white photographs are smiling. But now you know what those smiles were hiding. Now you know the cost of the Dream Factory's dreams. The truth has finally found its audience. If this opened your eyes, hit subscribe. Share this video. These stories need to be told. The dead deserve to be remembered, and the system that created this nightmare needs to be exposed for what it truly was and what it still is. Thank you for watching. And remember, every time you see an old Hollywood film, every time you admire the glamour of the Golden Age, you're looking at a beautiful lie built on the bones of the forgotten.